A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. Shout amen. Please be seated. Since I've been gone for the last few weekends, I've had the privilege, along with my wife, to minister to over 2 weekends, 2 marriage retreats to 120 couples or so. And can we just celebrate those couples who are serious about going to the next level in their marriage? So I thought, especially for the benefit of our first-time guests, you're showing up here in the middle of a series that we've called Change. And if you go to our website, nbccbayarea.com, you can pick up all of the messages that you missed. As a matter of fact, you can listen to them and or send them to friends and loved ones that you think would be helpful. But just to catch you up, let me do a really quick review of what we've been saying. Number one, we've announced through this series some really good news. Regardless to what you have experienced in your own life in terms of success or failures around areas of change, here's some good news. Substantive change is possible in your life. And I've said that just as God has built the capacity for change into the entire order of creation, God has also built the capacity for you to change and for me to change into our lives. And so if you can grow, you can change. If you can learn, you can change. Tell somebody you can change. Tell them. All right? That's good news the first quarter of the year. Now, there's some insight that is necessary, I think, to drive depth and substantive change. One is what I've called the principle of the path. It's just simply this, an easy principle. That every path leads to a particular destination. So I like to always teasingly say, but it's true, that I can have tons of intention to go to Sacramento. But if I get on 101 in San Francisco and go south, I don't matter how much intention I have, I'm going to end up in San Jose, not Sacramento. It is your direction that determines your destination, not your intentions. And so if you want substantive change in your life, sometimes you have to change your path. You have to change the pattern, everybody say pattern, of the kinds of choices and decisions that you're making in order to end up in a different place. And I've also said during the course of this series that the best way to ensure that you're on the right path is to begin to build the kind of relationship with God that you can trust God in larger and larger ways. And so we offer to you this DARE prayer that we encourage you to pray for 30 days daily throughout the day, which is simply this: God, show me the right path to take. Give me the wisdom to see the very next step and the courage to take it. And I think if you've been praying that throughout the day, I believe that God is already working in many of your lives in pretty amazing ways. And then lastly, if I think about the barriers to good change, everybody say good change. You know, there's such thing as bad change. So I'm talking about good change. There's a series of, part of this series was designed to address that. And I'll use some phrases here. So the first is the phrase that goes like this: I'm afraid of change. And that's probably because your experience of change has been pretty bad. It's been scarred by trauma and dysfunction and disruption. And so we spent a little time talking about how to go through good change. That's there. And then Kirk Perry reminded us that it's not that seeing is believing, it's believing is seeing. And what he meant by that is that if I'm going to make a decision to lean into God, I can't base that decision on my external environment, because sometimes my external environment is pretty lousy. But I need to decide to lean into God based on who God is, not based on what's going on around my life. Believing is seeing. And lastly, Pastor Tilden last week, who I told him earlier this morning, out of all the messages in this series, the one he preached last weekend is my favorite. Didn't he do an outstanding? Can we just celebrate? I thought he just did an outstanding job. So, what he said last week and ended it with great singing. I didn't know he could sing. This phrase, follow your heart. It echoes throughout the whole Western world. So many of it's follow your heart. And what Pastor Tilden reminded us, or let me say it a different way, in the sense that in the Hebrew, our heart is the center of our emotions. And the fact of the matter is we've been through so much trauma and so much dysfunction until those traumas and dysfunctions, they shape the center of our emotions, which makes our hearts deceptive. So what he taught was, don't follow your heart, follow God's heart. Now, that sets us up for the day. Here's a big idea for the day. In order to drive change in your life, you have to pay attention. Tell somebody, pay attention. Tell them, pay attention. You got to pay attention. Our passage before us today, one verse, which is a great summary of the 9 verses that comes before it in Proverbs, is written. Proverbs is said to be written by King Solomon, the wisest person on the planet, and there are those who argue that not all the Proverbs was written by him, some was written by his students. And so in either case, Solomon says to us this morning that when it comes to change, there are essentially 2 groups of people. One group is referred to by the word prudent or wise. The other group is referred to by the word simple or simpleton or naive or foolish. Now, in this particular passage, and this, throw the passage back up on the screen so that we can see it, the New Living Translation of it. Look at what it ultimately says. It says, a prudent person foresees dangers and takes precaution. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. And when you look at this passage, you'll notice a couple of things about both people in this passage. Number one, they both are on the same road. Number two, they both look down the road to see what's coming. Number three, they both recognize that there is danger down the road. The only thing that distinguishes them is in terms of their response. And one might say that one, the prudent, the wise person, is the one who actually paid attention and took precautions. And the unwise person or the foolish person is the one who chose not to pay attention and kept going. Now, ask the person next to you, which one are you? It's no fun to come to church unless you know. Some of you have been wanting to ask that for a long time. I just gave you a good reason to do it, you know. All right, here we go. Here's what's fascinating about the text. Let's still work the text. There's no gender assigned to the text. So it doesn't say the wise man or the wise woman. It just says the man or the woman. And so it's easy for whoever you are and myself to kind of decide, okay, now, which one of these do I fit in most of the time? The other thing about the text is it does not describe what kind of road they were on. It could have been that they were on, I think about this in terms of the roads of life and this notion of change. We're not just talking about we're not talking about the physical world, but we're talking about the pattern that is reflected in the kinds of decisions we make. And so I think about this in terms, maybe they both, everybody say both, was on the road, on a financial road. And maybe there was a financial consultant standing in the middle of the road down there, and maybe the consultant said, hey, stop. if you continue to spend at the level that you're spending with no budget and no restraints, you're going to blow your pension and your retirement. You're going to end up in huge debt, or you're not going to be able to help your kids go to college. Stop. And what the text says is that one of them heard it and stopped. And the other one heard it and kept going. Maybe they were on the road of relationships. And perhaps they were headed down the road. Maybe there were two women headed down the road the same. And they saw a guy, this fantastically GQ-ish guy. Right? Just standing down there. I mean, he's a hunk. And he's saying to them, come to Big Daddy, come to Big Daddy, come to Big Daddy. And everything in them, the way he looks, the way he smells, the car he drives, the way he dressed, his charisma, everything is saying, come to me, come to me, come to me. But he looks like, come on now, in terms of form and character, the last three guys that left their lives in a mess. So one person, despite the fact that they're both drawn, one recognizes danger flashing, danger, and stops. And the other keeps going. Which one of you? Or perhaps they were on a road of physical fitness, and perhaps there's a doctor down the road, and the doctor is shouting that if you continue on this path, no exercise, the way you're eating, or not taking the medicine that you're supposed to be taking, that in the not too distant future, you're going to end up with diabetes, or you're going to have a stroke. And one of them heard it and stopped. And the other kept going. Which one were you? Now, let me suggest that in this text there's some powerful insight. I like some of the translations of this text. So I just read for you the New Living Translation, but let's look at it in the NIV translation. The NIV essentially says that the prudent person sees danger and takes refuge. The other simple one, after seeing danger, moves straight ahead and pays the penalty. That's one. I really like the Message translation of this, though. There's a Message translation up there because I think this is one of my favorite translations, the Message translation. A prudent person sees trouble coming and ducks. A simpleton walks in blindly and is clobbered. Which one are you? All right, there's three things that we have to do in order to pay attention. Because we need to be paying attention. If we're going to change, we've got to pay attention. The first thing we have to do is we have to see, everybody say see, we have to see the connection. See the connection. What connection? We have to see the connection between what I'm doing today and what will happen to me tomorrow. You see, every action has an outcome. And what I do in this season impacts who I become and what happens to me in the next season. It's connected. It's connected. Shout, connected. It's connected. Connected. Now, I like this passage, right? Because I told you that both of these folk were on the same road. They both saw the same danger, right? They both saw it. But then there's a subtle insight. I like the way the New Living Translation puts it, and you also saw it in the Message as well. Here's the subtle insight. The subtle insight says, but the simpleton goes, what does it say? Blindly, everybody say blindly. Blindly on. Here's the point. The simpleton, the naive, the foolish one, saw it, looked at it, then decided to close her eyes and pretend that what she saw isn't there. And then proceed on. Here's how you know if you're kind of closing your eyes. If you're seeing something that's going danger, 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 and it's in the context of love, danger, 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 it's the context of finance, danger, 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 and it's in a challenging context. You know, there's a series of habits that you're engaging in, and it's now becoming addictive. Danger, 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 turn around while you can, and you close your eyes. Well, how do I know you've closed your eyes? Usually you'll say something like this. Oh, it'll work out. Let me give you some news. You're correct. It will work out. Horribly. Who's here closing your eyes? Who's here is a parent? And there's some stuff going on with your children. And you need to see it. Maybe there's a disability that is emerging in one of your child's life, but it's too painful for you to acknowledge. So you've decided to close your eyes and pretend that it's not there. Who's here? Who's here? Maybe who's closing your eyes and you're at work and you're really closing your eyes to your own performance that's going to undercut your ability to be promoted. Or you're closing your eyes to a relationship that feels casual, but in your heart and in her heart, you know that there's something more than the casual that's happening. You decided to close your eyes. Or your business partner is doing some things that may be ethically questionable. But you are closing your eyes, blindly going on. The first thing you have to do, see the connection. Second thing you have to do is ask the right question. If you're going to pay attention, it's active. You got to ask the right question. If you've been with me for a while, you know, you remember when I preached this series on wisdom. So I called it, "Is it wise?" And so essentially it's the same question, right? This is a good time to remind you that when those two folk were going down the road, they stopped, and one of them, the wise, asked this question. In light of my past experiences, in other words, I know who I am, I know how I operate under certain circumstances. In light of my past experiences, and in light of my hopes and dreams for the future, I know who I want to become, I know where I want to land up at, I know I want to be successful as an employer, as a husband, as a father. I get it. Where I want to go, I want to have financial stability. In light of my dream, what's the wise thing? Do I keep going? Or do I take refuge? The other one perhaps asks the question, maybe they ask the question, well, is it anything wrong with me to keep going? They perhaps asked this question, is it in the Bible that I shouldn't keep going? Tell somebody, wrong question. Simple question, is it wise? All right, listen, here, let me help you out. If your ex shows up, you know who she is. And you know how she is. And you know that she can mess you up. But she's telling you, come, let's go to dinner. I'll pick you up. And you know you still got a soft spot. Don't get in that car. Come on now, you know you're weak with boundaries. Don't you dare get in that car. Let her play Adele singing Hello. Don't do it. Don't do it. Is it wise? Is it wise? Let me tell you a story. Several months ago, my wife shared this story with me. It broke my heart. One of her patients showed up, and upon examining his story, taking oral history and all of that, discovered that he had a propensity for high adrenaline stuff, and discovered that he was a motorcycle rider. I don't have anything against motorcycle riders. Let me put that out there. Discovered he was a motorcycle rider. The guy said amen, so keep listening. Discovered that he was a motorcycle rider, and as an adrenaline high, he would ride his motorcycle around 60, 70 miles per hour. I know you've seen these folks weaving in and out of the cars. And I forget, they have a word for it. I forget what they call it. But they're weaving in and out. So Rhonda said, recognizing the connection, that there is a connection between what you do and probably what will happen to you tomorrow. Rhonda said, thinking about the question based on what he described as his history coming out of the military and the need for adrenaline and all of that, and that the impulse to do that, Rhonda was thinking about, is it wise for him to hold on to that motorcycle? Maybe he needs to get rid of that motorcycle. We're thinking about all of that. Rhonda says, listen, you need to get rid of that motorcycle. Don't park it, just get rid of it, because it's going to injure you or kill you. And essentially, if you can't come to make this decision on your own, let's get you some help. Because if there's impulse, let's get you some help. But the goal is, let's get you off of that motorcycle and let's sell it. That's the wise thing to do. All right, keep that story in mind. The third thing that you need to know in order to know whether you're paying attention, I got to see the connection. I've got to ask, is it wise? And then I need to respond wisely as a norm. It can't be my exception to the rule that really what happened was these two folk on the road, I mean, the imagery shifts depending on the translation. The imagery is kind of like a tornado is coming, and the guy says, I better take refuge. Another image is like a crazy guy is coming, swinging and hitting, and the guy says, I better take refuge, or I better take precautions and get out of the way. Right. But in other words, danger is approaching, and actually the danger is approaching, and the imagery is, I need to respond. I need to do something. Shout, do something. I need to do something that's going to be precautionary versus keep going in the same direction. And that needs to be the norm of how I make decisions. And the guy who's labeled wise, he typically makes decisions based on what's wise. And the person who's labeled simple or naive typically makes decision on some other criteria, not based on what's wise. So one stops and one keeps going. Respond. All right. Here's what the text says. For the one who is foolish and not wise, he or she goes blindly on or forward to suffer, everybody say suffer, consequences. All right, now here's the teaching. Back up to Rhonda's story. One day, Rhonda was tending to a patient. She was interrupted. Says, there's a patient of yours that's asking for you to come out to see him in the lobby. It's important. So Rhonda broke away, went to see the guy. Turns out it's the motorcycle rider who, for at least a year, she had been strongly urging as he would come in to see her, you need to get off that bike and sell it. Because of your makeup, you can't handle it. This time she goes out, he's in the lobby in a wheelchair. Turns out he was a tragic story. He was switching in and out. Somebody didn't see him, hit him, and both legs had to be amputated. Can somebody say suffer? Now let me stipulate a couple things here. Number one, life is broken. And there are a lot of people dealing with the brokenness of life, and it has absolutely nothing to do with anything that they have said, nothing to do with what God is trying to do. It's just a brokenness of life. I've got a dear friend who is amazing, a wonderful wife and Christian in L.A., who at this very moment is struggling and battling cancer. Has nothing to do with what she's done or anything other than it's just the brokenness of life that she stepped into. A month ago, I had to go and bury my former clerk of session from Boston, who was living in Atlanta, and at 61 years old, she died of Crohn's disease. She had been struggling with it for at least 30 years, and here she is at 61 years old, dies. Her 87-year-old mom says to me, life is not fair. And you know what? Her 87-year-old mom was right. Because Jane shouldn't have died of Crohn's disease. I mean, if I had to think of some folk to die of Crohn's disease, there's like a list I could come up with. Right? Like really evil, insensitive, unkempt people who just try, okay, like if you had to pick, you know. Life isn't fair. But the reason that young man is suffering in the wheelchair, that Rhonda's patient suffering in the wheelchair, has nothing to do with the fact that life is broken. And it has nothing to do with the fact that life isn't fair. That young man is suffering because he didn't pay attention. Now, there's a subtle suggestion in the text. It's a suggestion. It's a hint. It's a hint. The suggestion is that if you ask this question, my suffering that results from not paying attention, whose fault is it? If you answer this question correctly, you'll find the power and the passion and the capacity to move from being the naive one to becoming the prudent one. You remember a few weeks ago before I left, I told you about that time that I was on the riverbank and I had this trail and I kept trying to find my way home and I just kept going around and coming back to the same place, going around and coming back to the same place. And the fact of the matter is, listen, as long as I thought that there must be something wrong with the trail, I kept going around, coming back to the same place. As long as I figured that maybe God is not showing me the right. In other words, it's somebody else's fault. It's the trail's fault. It's God's fault. I don't know, but it's not my fault because I'm right. But the moment I concluded that actually it's not the trail, it's not God, it's me, it's my judgment, that's when I became open to finding a new route. Some of you guys and girls are suffering right now. And you're suffering in bad marriages. You're suffering in bad financial situations. You're suffering. You're suffering in bad employment situations. And there are some other folk who are suffering just like you in those same things. And it's because life is unfair. It's because life is broken. But let's just be honest. Let's just be honest. Let's just look at your decisions here. Let's just look at your decisions over the last year or two. And if you're really honest, you'll be able to say, I am suffering because I didn't pay attention. It's my fault. It's nobody's fault compromise. I went after looks and not character. That's why I'm suffering. I believe in playing first and working later. That's why I'm flunking out of school. Because I'm partying more than I'm studying. It's my fault. Nobody's fault. It's not the professor. It's not that he doesn't like me. He gave me a D. Come on. You produce the work, he's got to produce the grade. But the problem is you should have studied 8 hours and you studied 45 minutes. You get the point. When I'm able to say, it's my fault. And I say, hey, let's have the dialogue. I know that some folk, some of you are sitting here, you're thinking about this, and I don't know whether this gentleman said this or not, but it's possible that he could have said this. He could have said, if God loves me, why did he let this happen to me? Well, number one, this is not about God letting it happen to you. It's about your missing the connection that what I do today has everything to do with what might happen to me tomorrow. And number two, yes, God does love you. How do you know God loves you? Because the love was expressed in the warning. For a year, your doctor told you, stop, sell, stop. That was God loving you. Some of you here, you saw the scripture for the very first time, and this scripture written several thousand years ago, but God orchestrates so you could come here and hear this warning. Shout warning. Warning, and this is God loving you. And somebody says, well, what about forgiveness? I thought he was a forgiving God. He is. But you've got to understand that forgiveness is all about relationships. It's not about consequences. In other words, if you and your boyfriend playing around and you get pregnant, now both of y'all are parents, you don't have no jobs, and you're in a situation, and now you got to contemplate, do I have the child or abortion? This is your situation, right? All right, then you go to God and you say, God, forgive me. And let me assure you, he'll forgive you. Here's what it means. God says, this offense that you've created, I'm going to remove it. So it's not going to hinder my relationship with you. That's what forgiveness is. But baby, you still pregnant. Every decision has an outcome, and there's some places along the way of our outcome that we reach the place of no return. So it has nothing to do with God's forgiveness or God's love. It has to do with your being mature enough to say, it's my fault. Lastly, everybody say, do something differently. Say it. Then the simple can become the wise. Now, this is a true story I'm telling you. So listen, track with me. So Rhonda finishes talking to this gentleman. She expresses her compassion and her love. She's so sorry that he's in. And by the way, his family is with him, and they are steaming hot. They have very little compassion because they also have been telling him, stop, get off, get help. And he ignored them. Now, it's not just him suffering, they all suffering. So Rhonda finishes caring for him. She certainly doesn't say, I told you, that's not, you don't need to say that. Just be compassionate and move on. So she is. She goes back into the room where she's taking care of patient. And she says, I'm so sorry I had to go. My patient is a bike rider and got both legs amputated. And I just need to see him for a moment. And the guy that she's talking to says, I'm a bike rider. And he says, and I too ride fast. And he said, a couple of weeks ago, there was a bike rider hitting me, and a car hit him, and I watched him. He flipped up, landed, bike down on him, he said, and when I got up there to where he was and rode up by him, he was dead. And so Rhonda said, pay attention. She says, it's not a coincidence that I just came in seeing and told you, and you just saw this last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever it was. Pay attention. You get some help. You get off your bike. You get rid of it. Pay attention. A few months later, the young man came back, and she asked him about his bike. And he said to her, watch the subtle shift. He said to her, I have not been on a bike since I was last here. You see, the simple can become the prudent. Tell somebody, you can change. You just need to pay attention. All right, finally, when you get ready to change, there's some emotions that you're going to feel, and you just got to prep yourself for it, right? So the first emotion is this guy who's taking refuge before the trouble gets there. He sees it coming well in advance, and he takes refuge. His friends and his family who may not live prudently may laugh at him, may make fun of him, may say, why are you doing this? And you just might begin to feel some feelings of embarrassment. Shout embarrassment. Embarrassment. I'm sure the motorcycle rider, when his friends said, come on, let's go ride, and he said, no, I'm not going to ride. How come you're not going to ride? Well, because, my impulse kicks in, and I think I could have it. Then they said, but you've never had an accident before. I know, but I went to see my doctor, and she told me about it. I saw this guy, blah, blah. I just think maybe God is saying I need to leave it alone. And I'm sure his friends was probably like, man, what's wrong with him? I'm sure there's some embarrassment. Let me tell you a quick story. This is my last story. Embarrassment. The other day, my wife and I have an eating plan from time to time, which means it's a plan to eat good. All right. No, seriously. No. Low-carb eating plan, that's my strategy. And I kind of go in and out of it. So I was on it a few days ago, and and anyway, we had a party. We were celebrating Lance's birthday, and they had all these they had cakes and cupcakes and all this stuff here, and I was sitting at the table with my team, and they were all eating everything, and I don't eat that stuff like that, and so I was just saying, no, I'm not going to eat it, so I didn't eat it. I was struggling. And then we broke down and we had prayer, right? So I went into prayer and I was sitting down talking to one of our staff members who will remain nameless, Terry Murphy. And so I was just sharing with him, I was like, man, I really want to eat those cakes, but I'm just, be good. I'm just, disciplined. Terry says, well, all things in moderation, Pastor. That's all, I think, yeah, but, Anyway, I get out of the room without eating. 2 hours later, I go to get some coffee. Karen has brought in some of these small coconut little things. I don't know what you call them. But they were good. I'm sorry. But anyway. So I went to get some coffee. And they were right there. And so I went to get some coffee. And I looked at them. I'm not going to fool with that. And then I heard Terry's voice. I don't know where it came from, but I heard it, all things in moderation. I'm dealing with my embarrassment. Surely I can just eat one. Come on. It doesn't make sense, So I'm just going to get one. And so I opened the thing and I got one and I tasted it. It was really good. So I was pulling myself away, but then something called my name and I went back to see what happened. And before I know it, eat 2, 3, 4 of them. And then I say, just forget it. I'm going to Krispy Kremes or something, you know. Isn't that how it works? We don't want to be embarrassed. But you know what? If I can keep eating right, then I go to my doctor for my doctor's checkup annually. And hopefully he'll say this year what he said every year. Although my father had diabetes and it runs in my family, he'll hopefully say, you don't have diabetes. And if he says that, then the embarrassment that I would feel becomes relief. Because God has partnered with me to save me from great regret. What do you need to change? Where do you need to open your eyes? I stole this prayer. For the last 30 days, I've been telling you to pray this DARE prayer, and the prayer I want to give you now, which is a prayer to help you to pay attention. By Tuesday, your 30-day will be up, and I just want to keep you in a prayer mode as we move towards prayer and worship. I want to give you another prayer, and here it is. It comes straight out of the text. Lord, help me to see trouble long before it comes. Give me the wisdom to know what to do and the courage to do it. Because at the end of the day, you got to do it. And just think of how your life begins to change when you pray that prayer over your relationships. When you pray that prayer over your finances. When you pray that prayer over your employment situation. Help me to see trouble long. Give me the wisdom to know what to do. And the courage to do it. Change is possible. If you'll commit to praying that prayer, moving forward, all I want you to write under the response to the message